7th of October 2007, and it's the day that a certain British rider would win his second World Superbike title. After a close title fight with Yamaha's Noriyuki Haga, James Toseland in his second season with Honda would come through to win the World Superbike title after previously winning the title on a Ducati in 2004. For James, it was an emotional moment, as it was a year that proved a lot of doubters wrong, as when he joined Honda in 2006 after being booted out by Ducati, a lot of people thought he was mad for joining them and thought he wouldn't achieve anything with the Japanese manufacturer. But he did, and it was a perfect way to end his time with World Superbikes, as something big was happening for James the following year. In August of that year, it was announced that James Toseland would be moving to the pinnacle of motorcycle racing from 2008, MotoGP. And despite rumours that he would be riding for either Pramac Ducati, one of the Honda satellite teams, or even taking 10K Racing with him, the team he won his second World Superbike title with, he would actually be making his MotoGP debut with Yamaha, specifically with the Tech 3 squad, alongside another World Superbike champion, Colin Edwards. However, his time in MotoGP was seen as a disappointment among many fans who had been hyped about him given what he had achieved in World Superbikes. So what went wrong for the lead singer of Toseland, and why didn't it work out in MotoGP? The year is 2008. Lincolnshire has been woken up by an earthquake, along with other parts of the country feeling tremors from it. Beijing hosts the Olympics, Spain win the European Championships in a tournament that England didn't qualify for, and Lewis Hamilton wins his first world title in a dramatic title decider that saw him win it at the last corner on the last lap. Although if Felipe Massa gets his own way, which I highly doubt, this moment will be ruined. It's also the year that James Toseland made his debut in MotoGP, and he would be racing alongside some very talented and well-known riders on the grid. There was Jorge Lorenzo, who was also making his debut in MotoGP with Yamaha, albeit with the factory team instead of Tech 3. There was the late Nicky Hayden, Danny Pedrosa, Loris Capirossi, Casey Stoner, who was entering the season as the reigning world champion after a dominant 2007 season, and of course, the one and only Valentino Rossi. Going into the season, there was a lot of hype surrounding James, particularly in the UK, as it initially looked like he had got off to a good start. In the first race of the season, which was held at Losail, which would be the first time the race would be held at night, beating F1 to the trend, Toseland in his first ever qualifying session would qualify on the front row in an impressive second place, 2/10 off the other debutant Jorge Lorenzo and 3/10 ahead of his more experienced teammate Colin Edwards. In the race, however, he would end up finishing 6th behind Valentino Rossi, but even though he fell back, it was a decent performance considering the team that he was riding for. In the next two races, the results would be similar, as he would pick up another 6th place finish at Jerez despite suffering from bronchitis during the race, and then a 7th place finish at Estoril. However, at the next race in China, he would finish a dismal 12th before crashing out at Le Mans in a race that saw Yamaha lock out the podium with Rossi, Lorenzo and Edwards. Speaking of Edwards, it was very clear that apart from Losail, Toseland in the races after was being outpaced by his more experienced teammate Edwards, but given he was a rookie, that was to be expected. However, it would still be the case in the next two races, as even though Toseland would get 2 more 6th place finishes, Edwards would once again beat him, claiming 2 5th place finishes. Then, at Toseland's first home race at Donington, it would end up being a home race to forget, as in qualifying after falling off twice during the weekend, he would qualify down in 16th. And then in the race itself, it would get worse for him, as he would fall off his bike at turn 1 and end up finishing down in a dreadful 17th place, 2 places outside of the points. Although in a way, him having this dreadful race was a blessing in disguise, as before the weekend began, he stated that if he won the race, which would have made them the first British rider to win for 27 years, he would have stripped naked on the way back to the pits. Even though the weekend was terrible for him, at least he kept his dignity intact. From this point, his results would not be something to write home about. At Assen, he would finish 9th after qualifying down in 13th, whilst teammate Edwards picked up another podium. He would have a dreadful race at the rain-affected Sachsenring and finish down in 11th and a lap down, and then at Laguna Seca, in a race that was dominated by the intense battle between Valentino Rossi and Casey Stoner, James would qualify in 5th but would end up dropping back in the race and finishing down in 9th, whilst his teammate finished down in 14th, meaning Toseland finally beat Edwards in a race. Another dreadful weekend at Brno, where he finished down in 13th, with his teammate finishing 14th again, was finally followed by some good luck at Mazzano, as he finished in a familiar 6th, and it was hoped that this result would end up being a confidence booster. But sadly for James, this didn't happen, as he would finish outside the points again at the rain-affected Indianapolis, this time recording his worst ever finish of 18th before finishing a dismal 11th at Motegi. Another 6th place finish at Phillip Island was then followed by a crash at Sepang, making it only the second retirement Toseland had all year. Then, at the finale in Valencia, Toseland would qualify in a brilliant 5th, like he did at Laguna Seca, but would once again fall down the order, finishing the race in a dreadful 11th. In his first year in MotoGP, he would finish down in 11th in the standings, 13 points behind Loris Capirossi, and a massive 39 points behind teammate Colin Edwards, who finished the season in a respectable 7th. Not a good start to his tenure in MotoGP, but it was still something to build off for 2009, and James would be hoping that 2009 would be better than 2008. However, 2009 would end up being worse. The start of the 2009 season didn't get off to the best of starts. During pre-season testing, Toseland would end up having 2 crashes, one of which gave him a concussion, which thankfully he was able to recover from. After qualifying second in 2008, Toseland would qualify 13th for the 2009 edition of the Qatar Grand Prix, and then in the race that was pushed back to a Monday due to torrential rain on the Sunday, which sounds surprising given Qatar is in the Middle East, Toseland would drop outside the points in 16th, whilst teammate Edwards finished up in 4th. He would then get his first points of the season at the next race in Japan, but it only ended up being a 9th place finish in a race that Tech 3 struggled at. Then at Jerez, he would qualify down in 14th and would only gain 1 place in the race, finishing a dismal 13th before finishing 9th again at the following race at Le Mans, meaning in the first 4 races he had only accumulated 17 points compared to Edwards, who had accumulated 35 points. The next race, however, would be slightly better for Toseland, as after another tricky qualifying session where he ended up 14th, he would storm his way back through the field to finish 7th just behind teammate Edwards. Finally, a breakthrough performance in 2009, and hopefully one James would build on after a tricky start. But it would crash down to earth pretty quickly before it started, as in the next race at Barcelona, he would finish down in 13th in a race that was dominated by the last lap pass from Valentino Rossi on Jorge Lorenzo. He would quickly make up for this at Assen, as he would finish the race in the season's best 6th. However, at Laguna Seca, Toseland would arguably have the worst race of his MotoGP career. After qualifying a dismal 15th, James would end up jumping the start and would land himself a ride-through penalty, which as per the rules and is the same in F1, he would have to serve within 3 laps. However, due to him concentrating on catching the rider in front of him, he failed to read his pit board, which meant he didn't serve his ride-through penalty and thus was given a black flag and was disqualified from the race. James claimed after the race that the penalty was harsh, which is understandable given he did slightly move. However, like nowadays, even if it is a slight move, rules are rules. At the next race at the Sachsenring, James would have another dreadful race, qualifying in 14th and then only able to recover to a dismal 10th. However, at Donington, James in his second ever home race would end up having his best race of the season and gave the British fans something to cheer about. After qualifying in 9th, Toseland would find himself up in 5th after Jorge Lorenzo crashed out at the final corner from the lead. However, on the last lap, Toseland would come under pressure from Valentino Rossi, who like teammate Jorge also fell off but at the Fogarty S's. However, unlike Jorge, Rossi was able to continue and was charging his way through the field and found himself behind Toseland on the last lap. Going into the Fogarty S's, Rossi went for a move on Toseland and initially made the move stick. However, Toseland was able to perform the switchback and repass him at the exit. This sadly didn't last long for James, as Rossi would pass Toseland the following corner at the Melbourne hairpin. Toseland would finish the race in 6th, but it was an amazing performance and one the British fans were ecstatic to see. However, this wouldn't carry over in the following races, as once again James's inconsistency would creep in. At Brno, he would finish in 9th, and whilst his teammate Edwards was only 2 places ahead of him in 7th, he was 10 seconds behind him come the end of the race. He would grab another 6th place finish at Indianapolis before finishing down in 10th at Misano. At this point, his inconsistency throughout the season had caught the attention of not just Tech 3, but also Yamaha. Over in World Superbikes, an American rider by the name of Ben Speeds was catching the attention of everyone, and he was having an amazing season, competing with Noriyuki Haga for the title. and it just so happened that Ben just happened to be riding for Yamaha in that series and was also in Yamaha's books. Although the Japanese manufacturer backed Toseland, despite his 2009 season not going according to plan, it was very clear that Yamaha had to make a decision as to who was riding for tech-free Yamaha for 2010 alongside Colin Edwards. And so, on the 1st of October 2009, 3 days before the Portuguese Grand Prix at Estoril, it was announced that Ben Spies would be moving to MotoGP from 2010, booting out James Toseland. And despite offers from Pramac Ducati about a potential ride for 2010, which James turned down as he believed that Pramac weren't really interested in him, it was announced on the same day that James would be going back to World Superbikes with Yamaha in 2010 in essentially a swap move with Ben Spies. Toseland's MotoGP career would be over after only 2 years. However, he still had 4 more races left before he headed back to the series he had a lot of success at. But sadly for James, his MotoGP career would not end the way he hoped. At Estoril, he would finish 9th after qualifying down in 12th. However, in the last 3 races, he wouldn't even record a top 10 finish, finishing 14th at Phillip Island due to another jump start penalty, which this time he would serve, a 15th place finish at Sepang, and then a 12th place finish at Valencia. And to compound James's misery, and to sum up his frustrating 2009 season, Ben Spies, the man who would replace Toseland, was entered by Yamaha as a wildcard for the finale at Valencia to get himself prepared for his actual debut in 2010. And in that race, Spies, in only his first ever race on a MotoGP bike, would end up finishing a brilliant 7th, some 13 seconds ahead of Toseland. At the end of the season, Toseland finished way down in 14th, 12 points behind 2006 champion Nicky Hayden, whom himself had also had a frustrating season in his first year with Ducati, and a whopping 69 points behind his teammate Colin Edwards, who once again outpaced his teammate for the majority of the season. And so, that was it. After only 2 years filled with frustration and underwhelming performances, James Toseland's MotoGP career was already over. So what exactly happened? Why, after all the hype that was surrounding Toseland going into 2008, given what he achieved in World Superbikes, did it not work out well for him in MotoGP? Well, I think it is safe to say that his riding style just didn't seem to suit a MotoGP bike. In World Superbikes, apart from the bikes being completely different, as unlike MotoGP, World Superbikes are basically tuned versions of standard road bikes, the format of the races are way different compared to MotoGP. Before the Superpole race was introduced in 2019, World Superbikes consisted of 2 races per meeting, both of which were sprint races, like you see in the British Touring Car Championship. And because of this, it means that thanks to the Pirelli tyres that World Superbike uses, they are able to push more and be more aggressive with the tyres without having to do too much preservation. Which sounds odd of Pirelli to do, given they can't seem to make a good tyre when it comes to series that involve 4 wheels as opposed to 2 wheels. However, in MotoGP, because it's one big race until the stupid sprint races were introduced in 2023, it requires more preservation on both tyres and fuel. In James's first season in 2008, he got caught out with this very quickly. Back in 2008, teams were given tyres that were specifically intended for qualifying, meaning as a result, riders could push hard on both fuel and tyres without worrying about carrying them over into the race on Sunday, and they also allowed the use of full power. During qualifying for the Qatar Grand Prix, Toseland qualified second, having been pipped to pole on the last turn by fellow rookie that season, Jorge Lorenzo. However, in the race, James would tumble back down to 6th, just behind Valentino Rossi. And the reason this happened was because of the fuel. In 2008, the bikes that the Premier class were using had an 800cc engine, which carried less fuel than the previous cylinder engine, which was 990cc. Because of this, and to ensure every rider had enough fuel to get to the end of the race, the bikes were fitted with an electronic sensor, which would kick in after around 5 laps. After 5 laps, it would calculate how much fuel the rider had, and it would then determine how much power the rider would have for the rest of the race. For the first 5 laps, Toseland, thanks to his style from World Superbikes, was on full throttle, which meant that once those 5 laps were completed, he ended up having less power for the rest of the race, which meant he dropped back. James thankfully, however, was quickly able to learn this for future races. However, the main thing that James struggled with throughout his entire time in MotoGP was the tyres. As mentioned earlier, in World Superbikes, because the races in that series are sprint races, it means the riders are able to push more and go aggressive on the tyres without needing to preserve too much. However, in MotoGP, preservation is a big part of the series, given the race distance is longer than the sprints in World Superbike, and this was something that caught James out, as his aggressive riding style meant that he was being too abrasive on the tyres, given in World Superbikes he could get away with that. This is why his performances started to dip and why he was being outpaced by Colin Edwards, who he had initial tension with in the first few races of 2009 as a result of switching engineers due to James being unhappy with the communication with his previous one. It didn't help as well that Tech3 switched to Michelin's for 2008 after a few years with Dunlop, and then had to switch to Bridgestones for 2009 as a result of MotoGP switching to a single tyre manufacturer compared to the tyre war that they had the previous seasons, meaning for both seasons James was having to learn a different tyre. It also didn't help as well that from 2009 qualifying tyres were scrapped, meaning the tyres that they were using in qualifying, which were race spec, had to be carried over in the race, and that also caught out James with his riding style. Although it was very clear that his riding style was only best suited to World Superbikes and that no matter what he did, he could never get comfortable on a MotoGP bike. In 2010 he would return to World Superbikes as mentioned, however his return wouldn't be a success as he would finish 9th in the standings as he struggled to adapt to the Yamaha, failing to pick up a win and only achieving 4 podiums. Then in 2011, after moving to BMW, he would end up having a bad crash at Aragon, injuring his wrist and led to him being forced to retire from racing with immediate effect. Nowadays he does commentary for World Superbike on Eurosport UK, and he has also dabbled in the music scene with his self-named band Toseland, which he claims he had been using as therapy, as after he was forced to retire, he ended up suffering from depression, as he initially didn't have anything to occupy his life. But thanks to music, it has thankfully put his mind at a better place, and we are thankful that he is still around today. Even though his stint in MotoGP didn't work out, he had an amazing career regardless, which saw him garner 2 World Superbike titles and being involved in rivalries with the likes of Troy Bayliss, Noriyuki Haga, Regis Laconi and Troy Corsa. It's such a shame his career ended the way he did, as I believe he had more to give in World Superbikes. But what an amazing career he had, even in MotoGP didn't go the way he wanted.